Hi, this is how tort law as it applies to K-12 education. The United States uses a common law system when dealing with private civil violations. That means that instead of legislation dictating the law, a compilation of court decisions creates the law. That does not mean that legislation cannot impact tort law. It just means that for the most part, judges' rulings tend to shape the law. A tort is a civil wrong or violation of one's duty that caused harm to another person or private property for which a remedy may be obtained. There are three types of civil wrongs. Intentional torts are something that you intend to do to another person that causes damage. You do not necessarily need to intend the specific harm that occurs, you just need to intend to affect the other person with your actions. Types of intentional torts include battery, which is the intentional infliction of harmful or offensive physical contact, assault, giving reasonable belief that you are about to inflict harmful or offensive physical contact, defamation, actions that cause damage to a person's reputation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, which are comments that are way outside the bounds of decency and cause the other person distress, and false imprisonment, confining someone against their will with no reasonable ways of escape. Three other intentional torts involve personal property, and they trespass to land, trespass to chattels, which means movable property, and conversion. In trespass to chattels, the claim must entail that the action caused the property to lose value or is not usable. For conversion, the property must be taken permanently or harmed so much that it needs to be replaced. Unintentional torts are divided into two sections. Negligence occurs when a person causes harm through the interaction that they have the duty of care. Strict liability occurs when a person is held liable even though they are not at fault. Constitutional torts occur when the constitutional rights are violated by a government agent. Key components to tort claim in relationship to school. Duty. Schools and their employees have a duty to keep students safe through supervision, appropriate instruction when activity involves some level of risk, and maintaining a safe environment. Breach of duty. A breach of duty occurs when an individual fails to act in a way that a similar professional would have acted and due to that infraction harm occurred. Injury. In order to show an injury, the plaintiff must prove a loss or a damage. Causation. Indication that the injury was the result of the breach of duty. Basically, a teacher can be held liable for his or her actions or inactions cause injury or harm to a student while under their supervision. Let's look at what our duty of care looks like. Schools and other entities that work with children have a high standard of care when regarding their health, safety, and well-being. According to judicial determinations, the courts have held that schools and their employees have a duty to provide appropriate supervision, provide appropriate instruction before engaging in an activity that has some risk of harm, and provide a safe environment for their students. When making a determination of standard of care, the defendant is compared to a person with the same level of expertise and similar credentials to determine if the actions were reasonable. There are defenses that can be made after a tort claim is made. In regard to intentional tort claims, a school employee can claim self-defense, defense of others, defense of property, or necessity. The key is the first three is that the defense action must be reasonable action to the situation and use a reasonable amount of force. Unintentional defenses include assumption of risk, contributory negligence, and immunities provided by state law. Damages. There are two main types of damages, compensatory and punitive. Compensatory damages can be broken into two types, the cost of damage or liquidated damages, which is the actual cost of damage, and nominal damages. You did something that was a tort, but it didn't cost very much, so a number is assigned. Punitive damages are used as punishment when conduct was extremely reckless, outstandingly bad, vindictive, and/or malicious. Bullying is an intentional action of one or more people with the intent to humiliate or harm another individual. Some characteristics of bullying include that there is a real or perceived imbalance of power, that the behavior is usually receptive, although it can be a one-time event. The Kozlowski versus Berkeley County Schools case was a case about cyberbullying. Outside of school hours, a student created a MySpace profile to substantially harass another student. When the parents brought it to the school officials' attention, the student who created the profile was suspended from school. The student made a claim that her First Amendment rights were violated by the suspension, and the courts ruled that her rights were not violated because a school is allowed to discipline for expressive content when it creates an in-school disruption. Discriminatory harassment occurs when one or more students commit an action toward another student that threatens, harms, or humiliates that student based on his or her race, national origin, disability, or gender. In regard to the duty standard of care, schools are required to provide a positive learning environment free from discriminatory harassment. Schools need to not only respond immediately when a student is experiencing discriminatory harassment, but also be proactive in preventing discriminatory harassment. We have a bullying and discriminatory harassment specific training that all staff complete, but know that neither can be tolerated, and that we have policies and procedures for dealing with both instances that need to be followed in order to create a safe environment for students. When a student commits suicide, school employees who committed a breach in duty to care may face an unintentional wrongful death claim. Schools and their employees have a legal duty to provide and maintain a safe environment. Therefore, a breach of duty may include acting recklessly or being deliberately indifferent to the risk of harm. One example from the literature occurred in Ohio and involved a student with a history of suicidal intentions and cutting. After talking to the student, the counselor at the school contacted the parents, and the student was taken to see a doctor. Approximately 2 weeks later, the counselor was informed that this same student had sent a friend text messages threatening suicide, and this time the counselor did not take any action. The school district and counselor were sued by the father, and the courts held that the school was immune to the lawsuit, but the counselor should be tried due to acting recklessly by disregarding the risk to the student's health. The Court of Appeals upheld this decision. Another example took place in New Hampshire and involved a student with a history of suicidal intentions who had signed a safety contract at school, and her parents were notified. The student had a difficult day at school and was suspended partway through the day, at which point the mother picked him up from school and took him home. She then left to take his grandfather home. When she returned, she found him dead by suicide. This mom sued the school district, the counselor, and the teacher, claiming that they had a duty to prevent the suicide. This was dismissed on account that the duty of care does not include a special duty to prevent suicide. The school did not have exclusive custodial care, had warned the family of the suicidal intentions, and did not act recklessly. In summary, a school may be responsible for a student's suicide when the inaction created the danger, reasonable warnings were not provided to parents, staff acts recklessly by disregarding the risk. So when could a teacher be held liable? I cannot emphasize enough that the best way to protect yourself from a tort claim is to exercise good common sense and judgment. That said, we do live in a very litigious society, and it is very important that you analyze situations to minimize risk. If an incident does occur, it is very important that you notify me immediately. Right now, we are going to discuss different instances where a teacher could be found liable. Assault and battery is usually tied to an attempt at discipline. A teacher may be found liable when the degree of discipline is interpreted as brutal, cruel, or excessive. Also, a teacher may be found liable if it is discovered that the discipline was malicious or dispensed with the clear intention of causing harm. False imprisonment is again usually tied to an attempt to discipline and/or classroom management. A teacher may be found liable of false imprisonment if they detain students against their will, utilizing unapproved methods of restraining a student, like tying them to a chair or locking students in rooms or in closets. Also, taping a student's mouth shut would fall under this claim. As you can imagine, these examples could harm the student and therefore go against the standard of care that is expected of teaching professionals. Defamation is producing false statements of harm that harm another person's reputation. If the statement is made verbally, it could be called slander, and if the statement is written, it could be called libel. Most of these cases arise amongst colleagues and student teachers. A teacher can be held liable when they make either verbal or written statements that directly harm another person's reputation. Breach of duty or negligence goes back to the standard of reasonable care definition. Teachers may be found liable due to the breach of duty if the harm is caused due to the lack of supervision, not education students appropriately before completing activities with a level of risk involved, or not providing and or maintaining a safe environment. What can you do? Do your job to the best of your ability. Provide appropriate instruction before having students attempt a task that has risk potential. Follow school policies in regard to supervision and creating a safe environment. Follow school policies on privacy. Avoid physical contact to the best of your ability. Keep records of incidences and any discipline. When in need, find another adult before disciplining a child. Do what is best for each and every one of your students. Additionally, I will make sure that we have policies and procedures in place regarding protecting civil rights, discipline, and privacy. Training provided to students, parents, and employees regarding the school policies and maintaining a safe environment. Are there any questions? These are the references that I used. Thank you.